So what didn't add up for me, and this is the second thing, so apart from him not having a digital footprint, was some of the elaboration to his stories. So the famous one, which again I watched, was his parents passing away in a plane crash. Okay,
Mm.
fair enough. But him surviving the plane crash, for
I
me,
know.
that was like, okay, I want to look you up, buddy. And I would be like, okay, I want to have some, because you cannot be in a plane crash in the 20th century and not have it not reported. So for me, that would be something again, and it's not me trying to sound wiser over here. It's just me saying, wow, that's a little bit far-fetched just for me.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Tracy Hall. But essentially, I met a man on a dating app in 2016, and we entered into a long term intimate relationship. And almost 18 months later, I woke up to a video of him being arrested by some detectives outside of his Bondi Beach apartment for swindling 15 victims out of $7.6 million. Hamish McLaren was his name. I knew him as Max Tavita. And in the process, he stole my life savings, $317,000. And fair to say, he also stole my ability to trust.
Tracy Hall, welcome on the Better Than Peter podcast, and thank you for the introduction. I know I put you a bit on the spot as well, but for me, I wanted to hear from the horse's mouth. But Tracy, we'll start a little bit from the beginning, I suppose. You know, you've been a career woman, you've been in the marketing field for your whole entire life, pretty much, and just a little bit on that before we come to the romance bit.
Yeah, 100%. I've worked in marketing for the last 25 years, my whole career. I've worked for some of the world's biggest brands, eBay, GoDaddy, Afterpay, Virgin, and worked in marketing communications, so running campaigns and big sort of marketing communication teams. So that's my corporate background. And then more recently, I have turned my hand to writing a book about my experience, so a memoir, and also full-time keynote speaking and presenting on this issue.
But yeah, let's jump into you were married for 8 years, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, but you were with your partner for about 13. And then you separated, and then you were a year removed, and then you went on a dating app, or you matched with Mr. Max Tavita.
That's right. Yeah. So I'd been separated from my husband for just over a year,
Hmm.
and I was getting my head around single parenting. I was working a really big job at eBay in the city in Sydney, and I decided that I wanted to start online dating. And I guess I wasn't looking for another husband. I wasn't looking to have any more children at this point in my life. I just simply wanted to meet a companion, I guess, someone who I could spend some time with on weekends, someone who had similar values and interests to me, and that shared the same sense of humor. Those normal, I guess, normal things. And so yes, I went on a dating app and I swiped right on a man called Max Tavita, and he was a Bondi surfer and a chief investment officer for a family office. He had a megawatt smile. He had National Geographic blue eyes and, the blondest hair you'd ever seen. And his photos, like, he just looked really normal. His photos were of him like swimming, running, surfing, going to the beach. So we matched and we entered into a long-term relationship that lasted nearly a year and a half.
National Geographic Blue Eyes.
Yeah,
I've
you know the kind.
I've not heard that, so that must be an Aussie thing. But yeah, that's I'm gonna do that. If nothing else from this podcast, that's a takeaway. So if somebody I come across somebody with blue eyes, which really shine through, so I know the right term, National Geographic blue eyes. All right, so fair to say you were smitten a bit, by the initial, because again, whenever we match with somebody on a dating app, let's face it, pictures is the first thing we go by. I'm not surprised that, there was such an instant attraction. And then obviously, as you said, he presented himself with a person who works for a family office, looks active, fit lifestyle, fits into perhaps what you were looking for, or perhaps even more than that.
Yeah, he sort of understood both sides of me, I guess, the corporate side, which was very much entrenched in, Sydney corporate life and all that brought for my whole career. And then on the other side, there was a very much a down to earth real Aussie kind of nature about him, like a bit of a larrikin, great banter, great sense of humor. And I think, it's important to say that, over the course of our relationship, there was just so many conversations about finance and his line of work and how he was investing funds for some of the richest families in Australia. And, I would overhear conversations with his back office about trades they were making. I saw him tinkering on his Bloomberg screens. There were documents, there were reports. And of course, it was all fake. It was like a movie that he created. But then on the flip side, we were having this really lovely, intimate relationship. He was a fantastic listener. Which is one of the tactics, obviously, that he used to manipulate his victims. So essentially, all he had to do was listen to what I wanted, what my values and morals were, how I enjoyed spending my time, and he just reflected that back to me in human form. In the case of Max Tavita, he was very, very good at mirroring. And that's a tactic that is commonly used, I've since found out. But he was sort of a shapeshifter because he was this person for me. And then for someone else, he was a barrister. For someone else, he was a triathlete. He just sort of matched depending on what the person needed out of him at the time. So, chameleon, I guess, in a sense as well.
It seems like the Jordan Belfort of conmen, if you
A
ask me.
little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he
I mean,
seems
maybe he'd
pretty.
watch that movie.
Yeah, he seems pretty. I mean, just the fact that he can wear different shapes and colors with people around him, and as you mentioned, mirroring. One of the things which I watched and heard when you were talking about your experience was that it was a gradual and slow burn. It wasn't something where, and I suppose this is one of the tactic which these people use to reel you in, right? Because he's not going to ask you for money or something on the second or third date. But
No.
my question, I have two questions actually, and this is where I haven't heard this on other podcasts. So you mentioned that you saw a piece of mail or some document with Max Tavita written on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it was like placed in his letterbox, and it was an official looking document. It wasn't some jimmied up envelope. It was an
Okay.
official document that had his name, Max Tavita, and his address. And on my way up to his apartment, I would often pick up his mail out of his letterbox, as you sort of do. And I picked it up, but that had been planted there so that I
Hmm.
could see, I think there was that theory, and then there's another theory that says that he was busy recreating this next persona, and to do that, of course, you need official documents. So you need a bank statement with that name on it. You need your healthcare card with that name on it. So I think there's probably two things happening at once. But certainly when I picked that up from his letterbox, and it says Max Tavita, I didn't even question that he wasn't who he said he was, because A, I didn't suspect anything. I mean, why would I? And B, there was all of this confirmation of who he was around me that kind of, just put my mind at ease, I suppose. So my mind wasn't even feeling nervous about it. It didn't even enter my mind.
Because one of my biggest red flags when I watched your story was the complete absence of a digital footprint. Now, I get privacy. I understand the fact that people, a lot of them don't want to put themselves out there. Excuse me. But for him, especially the profile he had, for him not to have a LinkedIn profile would seem a bit odd. Or for
Yeah.
him not to have. So that was something, especially as somebody as smart as you are and somebody in the business world, uh,
Mm.
everybody Googles everybody. So
Yeah.
for me, I don't believe it for a second that you wouldn't have, or you would have at least made some attempt at some point of time to find him. And didn't you ask him about it?
Yeah, 100%. And I did look up things. So, we'd go out and go for a meal or what have you, and he'd say something, and I'd look it up when I got home, or I'd look for him online. And of course I couldn't find anything. And I'd ask him and say, hey, you don't have social media, you don't have a LinkedIn profile. And he was just so skilled, and let's keep in mind that he had been conning people for the better part of 30 years, right? So I come along and he's got an answer off the bat. And he sort of said things like, I've been, I've been working in New York for 16 years. I prefer to fly under the radar. I don't need a LinkedIn profile. The people that need to know who I am. I've got this job. I really am not into, and then he'd go on this big rant about, the platforms using your data and, surely, you are the product. And, it just went on these monologues. And, of course, the conversation moved on. And then I'd go and check things after we'd been out. And this is a vulnerability that I had at the time that I didn't realize. It was very late at night. It was sort of 11:30 at night. And I'm lying in bed trying to, find some information on Google, and nothing came up. And by that stage, I'm just absolutely exhausted. And the phone goes on the side table. And of course, the day starts again the next, morning at 6 a.m. and we're off. And life moved on. And I guess that was one of my vulnerabilities. I was very stretched, I was very distracted, and I was very tired. So things that I probably should have looked into harder, and of course would now, I just let pass. And then you layer over the top of that the fact that he had an answer for everything.
Hmm.
And no matter what concern was in my mind, if I voiced it, there was a very plausible and rational answer over the top that made sense to me.
Yeah. And hindsight is, 2020. Everybody seems more smarter when the
Yeah.
actual event, and again, there've been other shows as well, and documentaries, and it's easy as well. And me being the audience, I can feel that how come she was so gullible? And we have the smartest, most intelligent women falling for these. These are not people who are, you see these scams where the woman's not educated or something. In your case, it's somebody who's pretty savvy, digitally savvy as well. And for him to con you in this elaborate makeup scheme, I fear to say he was quite professional. What didn't add up for me, and this is the second thing, so apart from him not having a digital footprint, was some of the elaboration to his stories. So the famous one, which again I watched, was his parents passing away in a plane crash. Okay,
Mm.
fair enough. But him surviving the plane crash, for
I
me,
know.
that was like, okay, I want to look you up, buddy. And I would be like, okay, I want to have some, because you cannot be in a plane crash in the 20th century and not have it not reported. So for me, that would be something again, and it's not me trying to sound wiser over here. It's just me saying, "Wow, that's a little bit far-fetched just for me."
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely looked that up. I looked it up multiple times, and again, it was sort of an odd conversation because it entered our conversation very early in our relationship. Because when you're getting to know someone, it's sort of where do your parents live, or are they still alive? And it was sort of this very quick, oh no, they died in a plane crash, and that was the end of that conversation. And then the information came in tranches over the period of weeks and months and years, I guess. And so when I can retell that story in its entirety, what I have to remind myself is that story came in sentence at a time. And a sentence at a time doesn't always sort of alert you. It's when the full story is together, and you think, I look back now and I think, oh my God, like that's just ridiculous. Like as if
Yeah.
that exactly what you're saying. But at the time, and it's like death by a thousand cuts, and this is what coercive control and communication and manipulation looks like, is that it doesn't come in one big go, because if it did, you'd notice it.
Yeah.
And yes, and that was just not the only story. Of course, there were so many stories, and there were times that I thought, I don't know if he's just like being funny. I know that sounds weird, but like sometimes I just didn't know how serious he was, because he was quite a larrikin. And then, I didn't know if it was sort of for effect or impact or to generate empathy. And then there's this theory about people that lie. And it's like you make the story so big that people can't not believe it.
Hmm.
People don't question a big lie like that. And if someone says to you their parents have died and that's where the conversation ends, all you feel in that moment is empathy,
Sure.
And so once that emotion is elicited, then you go down a level, in terms of connection and you know, under their spell, in a way, is how it works mentally. So I think it's just so nuanced, and this is one of the reasons I wrote the book was because it is so hard to describe 18 months of emotional manipulation and financial manipulation into one story that lasts 2 minutes on a morning show TV, or a very small newspaper article. You need to explain it in this long form to describe exactly how this coercion happens. And you're right. Like I used to hear stories like this, and it was always just someone I couldn't relate to, like a lonely middle-aged woman looking for love on the internet in her lounge room. And I used to think, well, that's not me. That would never happen to me. And I never thought it would be me. But here I am.
When you meet the person who you really match well with, and you get off the dating app because you match so well, everything, then you have your blinders on. And obviously you'll have dating experts coin it in a much better way. But what happens is then it's almost like you found your person and you want to believe because you've invested. First of all, you've gone off the dating apps. That itself is a bit of a mini win. The second point is then you invested your time and effort, and then once intimacy kicks in, it's almost like he's passed the exam. He's been given the certificate, and now for you to have second thoughts or doubts to it, it's almost like then you're kind of cross questioning yourself rather than, I sound a bit like a dating expert if I say so myself, but this is a fact that because you almost are then questioning your own beliefs and so you didn't vet him properly if this was
Yes.
the case, let's say 6 months in.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And they're called, cognitive biases or biases. And we have many of them. Essentially they're brain glitches because we all like to think that we're a good judge of character. We all
Hmm.
like to think we've got good intuition. And I was certainly one of those people, right? And yet all of these things happened. There are a couple of things. So we have a similarity bias. So if someone looks, sounds, acts, thinks like us,
Hmm.
we are more likely to trust and therefore fall in love with
Right.
them.
Yeah.
So that was the mirroring thing that he did, right? He had blonde hair. He loved the ocean. He loved surfing. He loved running. He was in the corporate world like I was. He reflected back values that I have. And so, that was a similarity. So I was like, this person's like me, you know? And then there's confirmation bias, which is exactly what you're talking about. I had made these decisions. I had put the pieces of the puzzle together. And so even if something was a bit off, I was constantly in my brain reflecting them back to the decision that I made to confirm that I had made a good decision or that he was in fact who he said he was. That we have so many brain glitches and we'd all like to think that we are smarter than that and better than that, but unfortunately this is just our biology. And so we have to think critically. We have to think, I would say be skeptical, not cynical. And these are things that I didn't do. In a way, I wanted him to be the person I thought he was
Yeah.
because I was in love. And like you said, once you go to that level and you've spent time, they've met your family, you've taken holidays together, you've spoken about your future, you're talking about buying a house up on the, north coast of New South Wales. Um, you're presenting out your future.
Yeah.
And by that time you are deep. You're deep in the relationship. But I was also blissfully very, very happy. I felt like everything was moving in the right direction. But unfortunately, like he was being, lying beside me at night, and I think he's loving me, but he's actually finding all the ways to steal my life savings.
Yeah.
It's
And
just crazy to even think like that.
so let's talk about the financial situation which happened where how long between the time where you first matched on the app till I believe it was in 2016 where you first put an investment? How much, what was the time period there?
That was about 9 months,
Okay.
was the first investment. And this is another trick that scammers and fraudsters will do. So it was sort of this opportunity. His sister and brother-in-law were investing. He was privy to some information. And it was kind of like a bit of a dabble, I suppose. He was like, just whatever you can afford. Um, it's a no-brainer. I want you to be fun. And everything was peppered with these compliments like, you are the hardest working person I know, Trace. You deserve to be financially independent. I want to see you thrive. I want you to be the best version of all this stuff, right? And so put in a small amount to start with. And what came back was a good return.
So that was ten
On
thousand dollars, was it?
That's right, on paper. Yep.
Okay.
So he was like, it's turned into $20,000.
But he didn't
And
physically give you the 20 back.
no, so he offered to do that.
Okay.
And at the time I said, like, let's just leave it in that account. There were some other things going on, so I just wanted it
That
to sit.
that was the master stroke. Once he doubled your
Yeah,
investment, because from 10 to 20, you're not thinking 10,000. You're thinking he's doubled your investment.
yeah.
Like it or not, everybody loves money and everybody
That's
loves
it.
doubling their money.
Yep.
And when it happens to be the person you love, and in addition, you're getting to double your money, hey, you know what? I can see where a little bit of greed as well kicks in, but that's where the rationality would go out of the window just because he offered to give you back double your investment within, what was it, a month or 2 months time?
Yeah, a couple of months.
Yeah,
And a lot of the scams that are out there at the moment, this is what happens. You
yeah,
get put onto a trading platform and you put a little bit in and they fatten it up and they
yeah.
fatten you up because it looks like on the platform that you have made money and it all looks very legitimate. So you throw in more,
And
you
I
know,
have no doubt he would have physically given you the 20,000 as well because he knew he had you. He knew he
100%.
had you for sure. So you
It was
never
his
actually
trick.
saw your return on the 10, but then what happened after that?
What happened after that was, months went by and we took a summer holiday. We got more connected and started talking about our future more. And he said he started planting the idea that I should set up a self-managed superannuation fund. Now, in Australia, I know your audience is global, but that's a pension or a retirement fund.
Mhm.
It generally sits within a regulated environment in Australia under a fund that you choose. And but there is an option for you to take your money out of a regulated fund and invest it yourself. And there are a whole bunch of things that you need to do to make that happen. And he would bang on a lot about the fees that you pay. So yes, you do pay fees to these funds to manage your money and keep it safe and pay the regulators and all of that sort of stuff, right? But he would bang on a lot about that. They're taking all your money in fees, and then I could do better for, this is what I do for some of the wealthiest families in Australia. And this was not one conversation. This was hundreds and hundreds of conversations over a very long period of time. So he started talking to me about that and then basically convinced and then groomed me through the process of setting up a self-managed super fund. So I had 22 years of career superannuation sitting in a fund that I then extracted and put into a self-managed super. It was all set up legitimately because they actually won't release your money unless you do. So, but he basically guided and groomed me through that whole process, helped me with the documentation, worked with a solicitor on it, did that. And then the plan was to take that money out of that account and put it into a trading account in my name, which I thought was, I mean, I had done all the paperwork, it had all been set up. But the mistake that I made was that I wrote the check out to the trading firm, but I didn't put my name or my account details on that check. It was just sort of an open check to Bell Potter Securities, which is a legitimate trading firm. Now, he took that check and just put it into one of his accounts and washed the money that way, and it was gone. Of course, I didn't know that because he was providing me with statements. He was providing me with information on how the funds were going. He gave me all of the comfort, I guess, in the world that was all going along swimmingly. And the only thing in retrospect that I kind of, red flag was that I didn't have the logins to the
Right.
account. Now, now that I've gone through a professional financial advisor and I've really lent into my financial literacy and all the processes involved, I know that that's a massive red flag. But at the time, I'd never done it before, and he was guiding me through that. And I asked him many, many times for the logins, and it was always sort of, yep, when I get home, or yep, I'm just away surfing for the weekend. I'll get that to you on Monday. And it was always this future promise. And then, it never came. And of course, I was busy and distracted and life moved on. I didn't push hard enough for that information. So that's where it all went wrong at that point.
So from the time you invested 10,000 till the time you invested all your savings, which was more than 300,000 Australian dollars, what is the time period we are talking? Is it less than a year?
Yeah, less than a year. It was probably like 5 months,
Oh, wow. That was
five
a
or
quick
six
one.
months.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. And you're right, once he got the ball rolling with that initial investment, it was just, and we were all in on that relationship. We were looking at properties to buy together. It didn't take much convincing, to be honest. I thought he had my best interests at heart. I thought he was a professional in his field. And in the same way that if someone has a small business and I can see an opportunity for a marketing strategy or what have you, I've worked in marketing for 25 years. I would offer up that information. I would offer to help. But the difference is I don't have ill intent, And so because he presented himself as this finance professional, I believed he knew what he was talking about, and I believed he had my best interests at heart. So I had no doubts that he was the right person to do that.
Who did have your best interests at heart was one of your girlfriends who was not a big fan of Max or Hamish, as we know later
Mm.
on, and she kept warning you about him, and unfortunately, you didn't pay much attention or you kind of dismissed it a little bit. Do you want to talk a little bit about her and
Yeah.
what her, suspicions were and how much I guess she left it after a point, but how pushy was she in trying to tell you that, listen, you need to be a bit more aware?
Yeah, so she sort of went through the journey of me meeting him and, getting to know him. And she's a very, very curious person. And this is a great trait to have as a friend if you're worried about, someone that they're dating. She would ask questions and rather just leave it at that, top level answer, she would go deeper and ask more and ask more. And she was really the only one that knew that I was investing money with him or was thinking about doing my self-managed super, transferring my superannuation to him, to a self-managed fund. And when she found that out, so I think she had her suspicions. She never met him because, of course, we didn't actually get a lot of time together. I'm a single mum. I only have every second weekend without my daughter. He was a busy professional as well. So we sort of see each other every second weekend, really just for a night or so. And so when we had that time, we didn't really want to share it with a
Right.
whole bunch of other people. So he didn't, in fact, meet many of my friends over the time. And she found that really hard. And she was like, when are we going to meet him? When are we going to meet him? When are we going to meet him? And that never happened. And then I told her about the self managed super fund. And she took me for breakfast one day and she's sitting across the table and she starts crying.
Wow.
And I'm like, this woman I've known for 18 years, she has, like, I reckon I've seen her cry once before in 18 years. And I'm thinking, holy shit, like something's up. And I'm like, oh my God, are you okay? And she said, Trace, I'm really, really worried about you investing your money with Max. And I said, really? And she said, yeah, I've just got a bad feeling about it. And I sort of I was taken aback because in my head, I'm like, well, she's never met him. She doesn't really know the depths of our relationship. She hasn't spent any time with us. So how could she be making this judgment? And I said, Kath, he is the most solid person I know. You'll see. Let's organize a dinner with you and your husband. You'll see. He's amazing. And anyway, she sort of just left it at that. And we did go out for dinner, and that all went okay. She peppered him with a lot of questions. But in the background, she was doing a lot of kind of like, investigations of herself, of her own. She was writing away to the universities where he said he went to uni.
Wow.
She was right, she had someone else come down and take photos of the number plates of his car that was parked outside my apartment. She wanted to run the check on the plates because she just had these spidey senses that it wasn't what it, she
Didn't
didn't have the.
didn't his original name come up when, she went through so much detail? Like, how did it still keep coming up as Max Tavita, or nothing came up which was substantial to convince otherwise?
Well, nothing came because we didn't know his real name, right?
Okay.
So if you write away to university and say, "Was this a student of yours?" and they come back and say, "No, we have no records of
Right,
that."
right. Got
I mean, of course they have no records because A, he was never
it.
in the
Yeah,
States, and B, it's not his name. But so we didn't know his real name at this stage.
you're
And
right.
had we have known his real name, it would have been so obvious to me what was going on. But she had all of these spidey senses, but she didn't have hard data. So what she was doing was trying to build this kind of, folder of information that she could present to me. And it was so hard for her to have those conversations with me because she was worried it was going to ruin our friendship. Now, this is a 20-year friendship, right?
Right.
And she didn't want to be right. She wanted me to be happy. She wanted him to be Max Tavita, but she just knew that something was up. And while she was doing all of that, and she was getting towards the end of her investigations, he was arrested. So thankfully, she never had to do that. And I only found all of that out after the fact. But, she was the one that sent me the video of him being arrested. She was the first person on my doorstep with a bottle of wine and stayed with me for like 3 or 4 nights, just holding me while I just, fell apart. So she's an incredible, incredible friend. And often this is the thing. This is Greg Bear up in the podcast explains it beautifully. He said, when you're being scammed like that, especially in an intimate relationship, it is like you're at an illusionist show and you're sitting in the front row and everything looks magical. Every trick looks perfect. But the person who's standing side of stage can see all the sleight of hands. They can
Mm.
see all the tricks unfolding. And in my case, she was standing at the side of stage and she was seeing it all unfold. But because I had my rose colored glasses on, all the red flags just looked like flags. And I couldn't see it. I was under his spell. And I think that's a really important thing to know if you suspect someone in your life is going through something like this, that you're the one that's going to see the things that that person isn't.
Continuing in the same team. So when did the deck of cards fall down? And obviously, she was the one who sent you the link. So you put all your money, you invested with him, and then what happens? You hear about it in the news through your friend, but take us through a little
Yeah,
bit of the time period. And obviously you went, I mean, there's a bit of denial and so on.
of course. Yeah. So we had been in Byron Bay for the weekend, which is a little beach town up the coast. We were looking at properties to buy, came back to Sydney and started working again. He called me one morning and I missed the call because I was busy with kids and work and stuff. And I tried to get him back in touch with him that whole day. By that night, I was pretty worried because it's very unlike him not to return a call or be out of touch. By the next morning, I was absolutely frantic. And I was so frantic that I called Bondi Police and I asked them to do a wellness check on him. And while they were off doing that, she called me and she said, "How are you?" And I said, "I haven't slept a wink. I'm so worried about Max. Something's happened." And she said, "I'm going to send you a link and you're going to open it and then you're going to call me straight back." And of course, immediately I'm thinking he's dead. There's
Mhm.
been a surfing accident, a shark attack, something's happened. And she said, "He's not dead. Open the link and call me back." And I clicked on the link and it was the Crime Stoppers video of him being arrested. And it was so confusing to me because the headlines were saying things like Bondi businessman, 47 superannuation fraud. And I'm thinking, they've got it wrong. Like, this is so wrong. And I was in shock. I was in disbelief. I was in denial. I quickly had a conversation with the detectives who broke the news to me and told me his real name. And in that moment, I just, my world fell apart. And I spent the next 3 weeks of my life with the detectives putting together a statement, having to unravel the previous 18 months of my life.
Yeah. I would have imagined it would have been incredibly tough to process. And then you're going through the sifting through the lies and the deception, and then obviously you've lost a substantial amount of money.
I think pretty quickly I had to get my head around the cold hard facts. Once I knew his name and I could research him on the internet, there is a long history of all the things that he has done in the past. So there was no shadow of a doubt that I was dealing with someone really serious. It took me 18 months to fall in love with this man, and I essentially had to fall out of love with him within 24 hours. But it was the weirdest thing because I'm trying to get my head around all the money stuff and the fact that he was in jail and he'd been arrested and it wasn't his real name and he wasn't real human. But it was like I had someone there all the time 1 minute and then he was gone the next. And it was kind of like it was like he had died, you know, except I was grieving a fake human and a fake relationship, which was even more destabilizing because I was like, I shouldn't be so upset about this. Like he's a criminal. So on both levels, it was very, very difficult. I became very anxious. I became depressed. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I lost a lot of weight. And then I started to feel these incredible feelings of shame in terms of I can't actually believe that I've let this happen. Like, I can't believe that I didn't see this. And I actually can't tell anyone. And
Mm.
so the world became very small for me for quite a while. And while I was dealing sort of with the emotional fallout, I was having to do some very, very practical things like work for 3 weeks with the police and pull out every text message, every email, every conversation, every memory, everything about that relationship to build a statement. Because actually fraud is very, very difficult to prosecute because in essence, you freely give your money. Yes, it's under deception, but you freely give it, and the law sees it as a civil matter in Australia. So to build a case is actually it's quite involved. So that took a long time. I had potentially a fraudulent tax return that he had helped me with, so I was dealing with the taxation office on that. I had to unwind the non-compliant superannuation fund, which left me in a very precarious position. I had a 6-year-old at home that had to get to school and activities, and I decided very on no tears at the dinner table. So we just got on with things at home. And then I had to get back to work because it
Mm.
was my only financial lifeline. So there was all this sort of like real practical stuff happening that kept me, in a way, distracted and busy. But, late at night and early in the morning, I was just, an absolute mess emotionally.
I can imagine. And how quickly did you realize you've lost all the money? Was it right away, or did you try to see that could you recover it back, or was it an early realization that this is a write-off?
Yeah, I think the detectives. I kept asking them, do you think there's any chance we'll get money back? And they were sort of vague, but probably not as vague as I remember them being. I think I wanted them to be vague. I think I wanted there to be hope of money being out there somewhere to recoup. As the time went on, and I sort of knew the full extent of the case and the crimes, and that it was $7.6 million. I started to I had to accept that there was going to be no chance of getting the money back. And it was difficult in those sort of months and almost year following his arrest because the police really couldn't tell me too much. It was all very like high level statements. There's, many victims and it's many millions of dollars. The financial institutions couldn't really talk to me because it was a legal case at that point. Hamish's friends and family wouldn't talk to me because, of course, they're Team Hamish. So it was like this information vortex. And the interesting thing about our brains is we don't like unfinished puzzles or stories. So I was trying to put the puzzle back together and I couldn't get the information that I needed to do that. And it wasn't until the investigative journalist from the Australian started working on the story that all of that healing started to begin. And I was very clear at that point that it was going to be very, very unlikely that I would ever see that money again.
What made you decide that you want to come out with your story, and what is the time period we're talking after the arrest?
After the arrest, it was about a year before I spoke to Greg Berrup from the Australian. And I thought very hard about whether I wanted to be whether I wanted him to write a story about me, because there are feelings of shame. There is career and reputational risk. I had a 22, 23-year career at this point that I had to protect, because it was my only financial lifeline as well. And there's reliving trauma, there's shame, there's so much. But for me, I felt like, if in telling my story and if in telling this situation, I could save one other person going through what I went through, then it will all have been worth it. And what we do know about scams and fraud is that in Australia, 30% of people don't report. That's the figure we get given. I actually personally believe it's a lot higher than that. And we know the reasons why people don't report. But, how can you solve a problem when when you don't have the full picture, when people aren't talking about it, when the only stories you see are of, those lonely middle-aged women surrounded by their cats in their lounge room on those current affair programs, it's important for us to say this can happen to anyone. There is a scam for everybody out there. I don't care if you're a 65-year-old man or an 18-year-old boy, there is a scam for everybody. And for me, that was really important. And also, too, I think the story was going to be written anyway. It was very high profile in Australia. When you make a statement, your name is available to the media to use. They were going to write the story anyway. So for me, I wanted to own the narrative, and I wanted to own the story, I guess my story. And it was important for me to be able to describe in my own words what happened, rather than someone else having an opinion about, how I missed all the red flags or the signs that I should have picked up or what have you. So they were sort of my reasons for originally working with Greg on the podcast.
Yeah. And obviously, you came out with the book, The Last Victim. Talk us a little bit. I mean, it basically goes through your story, but when did it come out? Where can somebody find it?
Yeah, so it was published in May this year, and it's a three-part sort of story that is memoir. So it goes through my life before I even met Hamish, and without giving away any spoilers, a lot like Hamish wasn't the worst thing that had ever happened to me, believe it or not. Like, it was pretty bad, but not the worst. And so I had sort of developed a level of resilience, I guess, through my earlier years, so that when I met Hamish, I guess I was in a good position to withstand the shitstorm that sort of happened. And then it goes into a third part, which is what happened after. What happened after the podcast was finished and after he was, got his full sentence, and how have I managed to rebuild my life, and what am I doing with this experience now? So it's sort of a full circle story. At the moment, it's only available in Australia, but very, very soon, watch this space, it'll be available internationally on audio, so audiobook and ebook. So we're working on that at the moment. But at this point in time, it's just Australia. But if you are into true crime podcasts, then Who the Hell is Hamish by The Australian is a great place to get the full story about Hamish's lies and deception.
Course. And obviously now with the new year around the corner, how's 2025 looking for you? What's on the agenda? What's Tracy looking at? I mean, I if I'm not mistaken, you're with somebody right now. You've rebuilt your life. Romance part is all right now.
Yes, it is. And yeah, it's taken a lot of personal reflection, and I guess what I was really keen to do was not let this experience harden me in that sense, because the reality is Hamish is an outlier. 99% of people are good people who want the best for us, right? He is operating at the top 1% of sociopathic offenders. I was just unlucky to meet him. And yes, I was vulnerable. And yes, there are some things I could have done differently. But the majority of people are good. And I just don't think that walking through the world looking for all the red flags all the time is a place that I want to be. So I have made a conscious decision to really work on myself in that space, so that I'm not that cynical person. And that has set me up well. That has set my mindset up well. It's set my future up well. Next year is more of the same, more educating, more working with governments and organizations on solutions, educating people, educating our seniors, educating our kids, telling this story in all of its rawness and vulnerability to hopefully ensure that other people don't go through what I've been through. So yeah, I'm really excited about next year. Lots and lots of ideas, and yeah, I'm really enjoying the conversations that I'm having.
Yeah, well, Tracy, thank you again for going into detail and sharing your story. We'll obviously put all the links where you can find and wish you all the best. And I think you are a great case for a person who went through all of that. And as you rightly mentioned, that's not the worst thing that happened to you. There's been some personal stuff, personal tragedy as well. But from what I can gather, you're a very eloquent person, very well. Obviously, you have your corporate career, but apart from that, you seem to have taken it on the chin and moved on and now spreading the word out there. So again, on behalf of my viewers and myself, I'd like to thank you for being on the podcast.
I appreciate that. I'm so grateful for this conversation.